Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment, and give you my thoughts. Sorry for starting a little bit late. I'm having some computer issues tonight. For some reason, my computer's been going really slow lately. I'm not really sure why. But in any case, if you're joining us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm covering, feel free to drop those questions or comment in the chat. I'll try my best to kind of keep an eye on everything as we kind of move along. If you're watching this after the fact, super happy to have you. Please don't forget to subscribe so that way you never miss these live streams. It is every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So why don't we jump into the show? Okay, so let's take a look at the box office for this past week. So, biggest thing opening this week, coming in at number 3, only number 3, is Arthur the King. Coming in, like I said, number 3, only bringing in about $7.5 million. And it was projected to make about 11 to 16. So this is definitely disappointing if you're the creators of Arthur the King, on top of the fact that those projections were already kind of, humble to begin with, right? And it was made for about $19 to $40 million. So this is not a great start, and I haven't heard great things about it. I don't know if you know about this film. It's kind of like a, kind of generic, paint by numbers, inspirational, true sports story, but also has a dog. So there's that, it's kind of like two different kinds of generic movies smushed together. So it'll be interesting to see how this does going forward. But it couldn't even get number 1, which usually a new movie's usually at number 1 for the box office. Then we also have the Holocaust drama One Life, starring Anthony Hopkins, only bringing in about 1.7 million this weekend, but it's made about 33 million worldwide. So I think this is like a BBC film. So I imagine most of its market most of its box office has been made overseas, probably most likely in the United Kingdom. It's about a real life guy from England who helped a bunch of Czech refugees escape from the Nazis and stuff. So, again, kind of also generic paint by numbers. I went to go see it. I'll be having a review up sometime in the next week or so, but it's an okay movie, and I think this box office reflects it. And then number 9, you have the American Society of Magical Negroes. Sorry, I think it's okay for me to say that if it's the title of the movie. Only bringing in about 1.3 million, coming in at number 9. Again, this is kind of a low-key film. I've heard okay things about it. So again, it's more like on the indie side. So, it's not surprising to kind of see it lower in the top 10 here. In terms of things continuing, so Kung Fu Panda 4 holding first place in its second weekend now. I'm bringing in about $30 million. About a 48% drop, so not awful, but not great. Again, I haven't heard great things about it, but so far it's been doing pretty decently. It's brought in about 108 million domestically and 176 million worldwide. So it's, again, kind of like that, sorry, I'm getting reports that the image is frozen here. Not sure why that's happening. Hopefully it kind of gets sorted out here. But, it was interesting to kind of see Migration and how successful that film was. In terms of kind of being like a family-friendly animated film in a marketplace that didn't have many alternatives. Now that this has come out, I wonder if this is going to do really well. Also considering that Wonka isn't really having much more play at this point. I think it just came out in digital. So that's been doing very well. Coming in at number 4, also in its second week, is the horror film Imaginary. This is like the weird kind of sounds cool in concept. It's the one where it's like, I don't know how much of it, but it's almost like a podcast. Like if you go to the movie theater, the screen's going to be black for a lot of it. It's all like in the sound design, I guess. So I heard it wasn't very great, and it didn't do super well last weekend, and it's dropped from 3rd to 4th now. A 44% drop, which again is not great, but it's made about 19 million domestically, 22 million worldwide. So again, I don't remember what the budget was for this, but if a lot of it is just sound design, maybe it wasn't very expensive, and this will end up being a pretty decent take for this, but as more and more big movies come out, I see this just precipitously dropping over the next coming weeks. Then at number 5, also in its second weekend, is Cabrini, the historical drama about, I believe, like the first American saint in the Catholic Church, bringing about 2.8 million, dropping from 4th to 5th place, a 61% drop, and it's only made about 13 million domestically and worldwide. This definitely feels more of like a specialty film, and I think a lot of the people who really wanted to go see it have seen it, right? And then also opening this, I don't think this is opening, but I think it's gone wide, right? So it's now, it's added about over 1,300 theaters, whereas before it was maybe just a handful. So Love Lies Bleeding at number 6, coming in at 2.5 million. This is like the A24 lesbian bodybuilding psychological thriller, which sounds, it is as kooky as it kind of sounds. It's jumped from 21st place to 6th place, right? So again, that having that extra, play and all those extra theaters really helped bump it up. Again, and this is brings it up to a 2.8 million domestic and worldwide total. Just a couple other things. Dune Part 2 here in its third weekend. Still coming in after Kung Fu Panda. I had predicted maybe Dune and Kung Fu Panda would kind of flip-flop this week, but apparently no. It's still held second in its third frame. Only a 37% drop, and so far it's made about 205 million domestically and 495 million worldwide. And I think I read somewhere that it's already surpassed the first film's total in just 2 or 3 weeks, right? Again, couldn't happen to a better film. It's incredible. Highly recommend you all go see it. Let me see if we have any questions here. No, I don't think so. So why don't we move on? Just want to, speaking of Doom Part 2, want to give a plug. I did release my review last week of Doom Part 2. I gave it a 9 out of 10. I think it's an amazing film. Honestly, one of the best films ever made. You can find that review in the link in the description at cinemancuso.substack.com, where I write written reviews of newer films. Highly recommend you go check it out. So let me just grab a drink quick. Okay, let's start with story number 1. The U.S. House of Representatives have overwhelmingly passed the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, or as I like to call it, the PFACA Act. A lot of times bills have cool acronyms. This is not one of those that I think was intentional, but I like saying the PFACA Act. So what is this bill? Right, so this is, it's very generalized in terms of its title, but this is very much specifically geared towards the TikTok problem, or quote-unquote problem. So it's legislation to force ByteDance to divest from TikTok. Otherwise, if they do not, the app will be banned in the United States. The vote was passed with a 352 to 65 to 1 vote. That one being someone just said like present, and 65 people voted no. But the 352, that's more than 2/3 of the House of Representatives. So it was a very bipartisan effort. If you know anything about U.S. politics right now, the Republicans have a very slim majority in the House. This was, again, very much both the Democrats and the Republicans coming together on this. It was introduced by a Republican and a Democrat. You have Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin, and Rep. Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat from Illinois, right? So again, that kind of bridging of the aisle. And usually, I'm trying to go back to like Schoolhouse Rock level of like how bills work, right? But usually before it gets a full floor vote, it has to get approved within like different subcommittees. The committee that was working on this unanimously approved the bill to be sent to the floor. I think it was like a 50-0 vote, right? This is the first ever bill, at least in the United States, to block an internet app. And it would also give the president, the office, not necessarily Joe Biden specifically, but the office of the presidency, the power to apply this law to different apps at his or her discretion, right? Specifically, this would be used to target any apps controlled by either like China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran. I don't really see North Korea or Iran this ever being an issue, but Russia you could maybe see, but more so China. in general, but then specifically with this, right? So what are the details here? So the details of the bill is that ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, or at least has a controlling stake in TikTok, would have about 6 months to sell its stake in the company. Otherwise, the app is going to be banned from American app stores and web hosting services. So you would not be able to access it without going through some kind of illegal means, right? As of right now, it's already banned on federal work devices like laptops or phones or what have you. We have a quote here from Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers saying, quote, "We have given TikTok a clear choice. Separate from your parent company ByteDance, which is beholden to the CCP, which is the Chinese Communist Party, and remain operational in the United States, or side with the CCP and face the consequences. The choice is TikTok's," end quote. So if you haven't been paying attention, you might be saying, well, why is this happening? Well, what is going on with all this? So TikTok, like I said, is mostly controlled by a Chinese company, ByteDance, right? And there's concerns that China could potentially use data collected by TikTok for whatever they might want to do, right? There are laws in China that can force companies to share data for national security reasons, but essentially, you know, the Chinese government can really at whim subpoena any information from any company that's a Chinese company for whatever reason, right? So there's concerns that, you know, like what would they do with this data? Well, they could run disinformation campaigns, you know, not necessarily like creating content of their own, but potentially boosting content that they find more favorable to their geopolitical position in the world, right? One example people have given is the conflict in Israel and Palestine. You know, I think there's a statistic that on TikTok has a disproportionate amount of pro-Palestinian content versus like other social media platforms. I would maybe argue, like, is it possible that it could just be that younger people are on TikTok and younger people just in general genuinely disagree with Israel's actions or strategies? There's no way to prove any of that, but that has been an example people have given, that China, you know, which supports Iran, which supports Hamas, you know, it's in China's benefit to weaken Israel, theoretically, right? The overall, though, this action is just another escalation in a developing Cold War between the United States and China, right? And we saw how the last Cold War went, and I'm personally, I think I speak for everyone, we don't really want that. It's not quite at a Cold War level yet, you know, just because our two countries are just so economically intertwined in ways that we never were with the Soviet Union, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen if we're not diligent, right? So this just adds more fuel to the fire. And furthermore, I think a lot of politicians, because again, it was very bipartisan. I think a lot of politicians here voted for this, you know, because they want a virtue signal that they seem tough on China. Which, if you know anything about Cold War history, was a very big prominent thing. You didn't want to seem soft on communism, right? And you know, it I think is important to mention here that, you know, representatives, you know, are up for re-election every 2 years, right? So every single person who voted for this is up for re-election in the fall, right? So I think this was a very shrewd decision by a lot of these politicians, even if they maybe also have genuine concerns. It also, you know, it definitely didn't hurt their political ambitions, right? But it raises some interesting questions because, you know, we're concerned about China stealing our data, but we, and by we I mean at least like the powers that be, we don't really seem to care about American social media companies stealing our data. I mean, we do. There's a lot of lip service paid to, like, you know, we have to stop these big tech companies and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we've known about this for years. So, like, why, you know, like, it feels like we're really focusing on China because they are a potential geopolitical economic competitor, and not because of like the actual concerns, right? But this would not be unprecedented. You know, Representative Frank Pallone, who's a Democrat from New Jersey, notes that foreign entities cannot have a controlling stake in American broadcast stations, for example. And then we have another, you know, observation from Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, who I said earlier is one of the people who introduced the bill, Democrat from Illinois, notes that, you know, this already kind of happened with an app. There was a Chinese company that owned, or at least a controlling stake of the dating app Grindr, and they were forced to divest their interest in the company, right? So this would not be unprecedented, right? So, you know, let's take a look at, you know, how people have been reacting to the situation. So in terms of, let's look at presidential reactions to start. The two leading candidates, which unfortunately they are the two leading candidates. Anyone who's saying, oh, there's still a chance, they're going to be the people on the ballot in November. So Joe Biden has signaled, I think more than signaled, I think he's explicitly said that if this bill were to pass the Senate, and it got to his desk, he would sign it, right? Which is strange considering that he's on TikTok, right? The username @BidenHQ, which I think was launched on the day of the Super Bowl. So it's kind of like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. This is this major national security concern, but you're also using it for your election, right? So what does Donald Trump think about this, right? So it's interesting because he initially suggested a ban in 2020, I think like in the summer. What a great time to announce something. The summer of 2020. There was nothing else going on then. But now he's against it, despite he's the one who kind of introduced the idea of potentially banning it. His kind of about face kind of feels like a reaction to Biden's support. It's like, oh, because Biden has said he would sign it, like now I need to kind of just do the opposite and just say the opposite. And I think he's shrewdly trying to show that he's more in tune with younger voters, because obviously the people who use TikTok the most are younger voters. So if he's kind of seen as someone who wants to say, quote unquote, save TikTok, maybe in his mind that could potentially help in terms of the electoral math come November. We have a quote from him saying, quote, if you get rid of TikTok, Facebook and Zuckerschmuck will double their business, end quote. Also saying that Facebook is, quote, a true enemy of the people, end quote. So his kind of argument is that if you get rid of TikTok, this is only help existing players in the space like Facebook, which is valid. And I can't believe I'm saying I kind of agree with what Trump is saying here, but his reasons for saying this are not quite in good faith. Obviously he still has some, let's just say, hard feelings about getting banned, or at least initially banned from Facebook after January 6th. So I don't know if he really cares about Facebook. I think he thinks Facebook is an enemy of the people, not because of the way they have basically social engineered these social ills with, especially my generation, but then even generations following. The reason why they're the enemy of the people is because they banned me, right? Is what Trump would say, right? So it kind of feels a little bit in bad faith here. So what's the reaction from TikTok, right? So they were heavily lobbying members of Congress to vote no on this bill. Obviously, that did not work. It denies that it gives data to the CCP, notes that 60% of ByteDance is owned by global investors outside of China, and their main offices are in Los Angeles and in Singapore, and that the CCP has never made such a request, and even if they did, they would refuse it, right? So they're basically saying this is not a problem, and even if this isn't even happening, and if it was happening, we wouldn't agree to it, right? And I think there was a TikTok press statement saying, quote, this process was secret and the bill was jammed through for one reason, which is actually kind of true. It was very quick, the speed that this bill made it through the House. The bill was jammed through for one reason. It's a ban based on zero evidence. We are hopeful that the Senate will consider the facts, listen to their constituents, and realize the impact on the economy, 7 million small businesses, and the 170 million Americans who use our service, end quote. So they're really making a plea here where it's like this would have major social ramifications, not only on people who use it, but then people who use it as the consumer end, but then the creator end. It would also create a lot of rifts for some of these small businesses that use TikTok, right? They sent push notifications. I didn't get one, but maybe I did. I just didn't see it. But apparently, TikTok sent like push notifications to people, basically being like, "We need your help," and like directing them to call their representatives and like giving them a tool to find out like the phone number for the representative, saying, "quote Your voice can help the TikTok communities you love," end quote. And this is not the first time that TikTok has been a focus of the House of Representatives. TikTok CEO, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Shu Zi Chu, last year, spoke at a House committee hearing, again, on TikTok and the security concerns. We have a quote from him here saying, quote, a change in ownership would not impose any new restrictions on data flows or access. All global companies face common challenges that need to be addressed through safeguards and transparency, end quote. So his argument is basically like, okay, yeah, you could do this, we could spin it off, but it doesn't solve the root problem here. So what are the reaction from TikTok creators and users, who I kind of mentioned before? So the LA Times kind of did, profile is the wrong word, but kind of spoke to a bunch of different TikTok creators, different kinds of TikTok creators. So one of the people that they highlighted was someone named Brandon Hurst, who's a Los Angeles plant shop owner, who said that the app boosted his lackluster sales, saying, quote, banning TikTok would shut down a lot of small businesses, including mine. These representatives and senators don't understand that what they're doing won't just harm people they call content creators, it would hurt small businesses, end quote. I think that's fair, right? In a sense, I'm a small business owner in terms of doing this show, and if you're watching this on YouTube right now, great, but you might also be watching this on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, right? So TikTok has been a great kind of catalyst for some people's businesses and their success. LA Times also highlights Gigi Gonzalez, who's a financial educator from Chicago, who said that she earns her living largely through brand deals on TikTok and selling digital courses of hers on TikTok. We also have someone, Heather DeRocco, who's an artist and content creator, who said, quote, I could not replicate the money that I make on TikTok through any other platform. I lose my biggest platform as a content creator, stripped from me with no recompense or compensation, end quote. And again, that's a good point. People can make a lot of, and not even just we're not talking millions and millions of dollars, though some people do, but just for some people, like Heather here, this is the main source of how she makes a living. So this would be hugely damaging, and like she's saying, it's not like she would then get a check a check from the government. Sorry, we know you're not gonna be able to make this money now, but tough luck. A study from Oxford Economics showed that TikTok, supposedly drove about $14.7 billion in small business revenue and contributed $24.2 billion to U.S. gross domestic product last year. So the impact that TikTok has on the American economy, I think is should not be understated, right? So what happens now? So the bill now, if you watch Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill, right? The bill is now going to go to the Senate. Currently, there's no companion bill, so that would need to kind of happen first. But there's no set timetable for considering this bill, and it could very well not even be discussed until after the election, right? Just because it could impact the election in a lot of ways. So I think the Senate doesn't want to touch that right now. And it could very well be held up by filibuster, as we've seen in the Senate for basically since my coming of age, with the dawn of the modern Republican strategy of the filibuster, with Mitch McConnell and the red wave in 2010. Senator Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, has indicated as much, that he would do whatever he could to kind of gum up the works here. So there are some obstacles to this, and even more dissent about this. So, like I mentioned, there were 65 no votes. And again, just as support for the bill was bipartisan, negative kind of perspectives on the bill were also bipartisan. So you have on one hand someone like AOC, right? Who voted no, saying, quote, this bill was incredibly rushed from committee to vote in 4 days with little explanation. There are serious antitrust and privacy questions here, and any national security concerns should be laid out to the public prior to a vote, end quote. So you have that complete end of the spectrum. And then you have the complete other end of the spectrum, Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Who has also voted no on the bill. But the Republicans and the Democrats seem to be concerned, but for different reasons. So this is not, a blanket statement, but it seems on the whole, Republicans are more concerned that such a bill would set a precedent for a sitting president to decide what apps Americans can use. So theoretically, it's a slippery slope. An American president could decide, this app that is hurting me politically, will find a way to ban it somehow, right? On the other hand, Democrats feel that it's a violation of First Amendment rights, right? We have a quote here from and I think this actually might be from a Republican, though, even. Representative Mike Gallagher saying that the bill, quote, takes no position at all on the content of speech, only for an adversary control of what is becoming the dominant news platform for Americans under 30. This is a common sense measure to protect our national security, end quote. Again, I'm not sure if this is a First Amendment violation. And I think that explanation makes a lot of sense, because it's not, your speech isn't being limited, just the platform on which you can still say what you want on Facebook. The fact that this app is in question doesn't really seem to be a First Amendment issue for me, right? But this is also just a legally dubious argument in general, though. Because again, this potential encroachment of the Chinese government on American data and being able to influence what Americans are viewing, it's all hypothetical, right? There's no like concrete evidence, so that could potentially make it, tied up in the courts, even if this were to pass in the Senate and then Biden were to sign it. And it would also, another obstacle is this would be an incredibly expensive sale, right? It's potentially worth up to $50 billion. The sale would be. Now, TikTok is worth way more, but the sale is estimated to, if it were to be sold, would be about $50 billion. And because it's valued in March of 2023, so about, I guess, a year ago, it was valued at $220 billion. $100 billion of which would just be the U.S. market. The New York Times notes that this would be too expensive for a competitor like Snapchat, but then companies like Google, Apple, and Meta could afford it, but this could potentially raise antitrust concerns, right? Because especially YouTube and Facebook have their own kind of like TikTok competitors with YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. Interestingly, Zuckerberg did try to buy ByteDance and Musical.ly, which was like the predecessor to TikTok, way back when, and that ended up falling through. Though I don't think it was for antitrust reasons. But in any case, I bet he really wishes that did materialize. So who would buy this, right? It would most likely need to be a group of investors to put up the necessary cash, or it could perhaps be spun off into a public company and then sell shares on the stock market, right? But potential buyers, there's still kind of people kind of talking, but again, no one I think wants to publicly say anything until it actually becomes like, yes, a sale is going to happen or need to happen. So you have people like Bobby Kotick, who is the former and controversial CEO of Activision. There's a lot of scandals in terms of like gender discrimination at Activision. He left last year after the company was acquired by Microsoft. And it's reported that he's looking for partners, particularly someone like OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who's obviously a big player in the tech space. And the Wall Street Journal notes that, quote, OpenAI could use TikTok to help train its AI models if a partner such as Kotick could raise the capital for such an acquisition, end quote. So yeah, OpenAI is the people who create ChatGPT. So TikTok, if they were to own that, could be something they could train their data on, both text, but then also as video becomes more of a thing, which I have a whole video on. You should go check it out. Having something like TikTok could be really helpful to train those AI models. And then you also have another potential buyer, Steven Mnuchin, who is the former Treasury Secretary in the Trump administration. He's also financed some films in Hollywood, like Mad Max Fury Road and the Lego Batman movie. And he had this to say, quote, "It's a great business, and I'm going to put together a group to buy TikTok. It should be owned by U.S. businesses. There's no way that the Chinese would ever let a U.S. company own something like this in China," end quote. And I think that's actually a very good point, that, the fact, like, this situation would never even arise in China. They would never allow an American company to have a controlling stake in an app or social media platform that has the reach that TikTok does in the United States, right? But overall, I think, I can't really speak to the national security concerns. That's not my, background. I'm not sure if that's even founded. And again, it kind of just feels like it's less about the issue and more, let's find something so we can show we're, tough on China, right? So I don't know. I think a lot of this is some cynical kind of posturing. And it also kind of speaks to a sentiment I've seen a lot of on social media. It's like, so Congress, like AOC mentioned, like this basically was like a 4-day process to get this through. And yet there's so many other priorities that most of the American public across the spectrum, political spectrum, are in support of. Like we can't pass a bill like that. We can pass this within 4 days, but we can't get anything else done in Congress. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens going forward, but I really don't. I'm really not sure, but I think something's going to have to happen. I'd be shocked. It's just such a valuable company and just product. It is like the defining tech product of the 2020s, I think. If Facebook was that for 2000s, Twitter or maybe Instagram for the 2010s, TikTok, I think, for the 2020s. We have a comment here. Why is TikTok such a concern when Facebook was never banned after Russia's influence of the American public in the 2016 election? That's a great question. So, again, the issue here is not what's happening on the apps necessarily, but more downstream. Like, who is controlling it? So, Russia, if you believe that, right? Russia interfering in the 2016 election by, flooding people's feeds with bots and propaganda and like highly politically charged posts and rhetoric to kind of get people all riled up and create instability. That is just using the mechanisms of Facebook, right? What the concern here, according to, proponents of this bill, is that because China has that control, and because of their ability to essentially commandeer and subpoena any information that they want, they could potentially put their thumbs on the scale. And again, I'm not as hawkish on China as some other people are, but I heard a great, analysis. Again, I listened to Scott Galloway on Prof G podcast, and he said, the Chinese government would be stupid not to do this. If countries, if you just accept that all countries are amoral, self-interested geopolitical actors, if they had this opportunity, why wouldn't they do it, right? Which I think is an interesting argument. He basically, said admittedly, like, we would do the same thing. If this situation was reversed, which I mentioned before, would never happen. The China would never let that happen. But if this was reversed, we would absolutely use that as, to kind of put our thumb on the scale and potentially, and we've done that with PSYOPs, psychological operations in other countries, the CIA. I'm not saying it's right. I more or less condemn those actions, but that is something that we've done. So, China would be stupid not to if they had that opportunity. So again, only time will tell. Again, I think it's gonna be sold or spun off or something. It's too big to fail. There's just too much money here. Okay, let me grab a quick drink. I know that was a long one, but some of these other stories tonight are a little bit shorter, but no less interesting. Okay, let's talk about story number 2 here. So, the guy you're looking at here is Bo DeMaio, and he is, or should I say was, the showrunner for the upcoming X-Men 97 animated series. He has been abruptly fired, and no one knows why. So he had completed, writing for season 2. And he was working on ideas for season 3. He had been lining up press. He had planned on attending the premiere on March 13th. So X-Men 97 is a continuation of the popular X-Men animated series from the 1990s. It's kind of like a reboot, but also kind of sequel. That's premiering on Disney Plus, I think, like literally this week, if not today, like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. But who is this guy, right? So he wrote on Moon Knight, the MCU Disney Plus show. He also wrote some early drafts of the upcoming Blade MCU film. And notably, he's a gay black screenwriter, right? So when he was hired to be the showrunner for X-Men 97 in November 2021, a lot of people were really happy with the decision, and the choice was praised, right? His kind of background, he was adopted by white parents in the South and had a Korean sister, or I guess like stepsister. So for him, the X-Men story and this idea of prejudice and overcoming all this stuff of society's kind of ills, he found it very relatable, right? So it kind of seems like a match made in heaven. But yeah, so he's been fired, and no one knows why. So no reason has been given. And it's really strange, right? Considering, so I think he was fired last week. Again, yeah, so this is premiering March 20th. So what happened? What happened to cause Disney to fire the showrunner of this show like a week before it's about to premiere? AV Club notes that Disney, they're not afraid to throw ousted creators under the bus. Right? So you look at something like Daredevil Born Again, which is like a Disney Plus Daredevil show that's upcoming. That was kind of a continuation of the Netflix show. It was supposedly going kind of in one direction, and then Disney kind of didn't like that direction, so they kind of pulled the plug. And very kind of, not being like, these people sucked, but like making it very clear that we didn't like the direction the people were taking, so we want to retool it and bring in new people, right? So they have no problem throwing someone under the bus. So it doesn't. So my guess is that it would not be creative differences, right? Brad Winderbaum, who is the head of Marvel Studios TV, was asked if he'd call this situation a firing, and he said, "quote, I don't. We parted ways is the best way I could say it, end quote. He also went on to say, quote, Bo had real respect and passion for these characters and wrote what I think are excellent scripts that really the rest of the team were able to draw inspiration from to build this amazing show that's on screen, end quote. Again, that seems kind of nice. So I'm also not sure if he did something awful and that's why he was fired, because I don't know if you would want to be on record saying this really nice thing right before some awful thing is about to come out. But again, that also felt very geared towards less about Bo and more about the quality of the show, which is upcoming, right? But again, this was very abrupt. Like, his company email was deactivated almost immediately, and the crew was just told, but they were also not given an answer, supposedly. And DeMeo's Instagram account, he also deleted his Instagram account. And it's strange considering that, from what I understand, he had a very prolific social media presence. He was always engaging with people, sometimes, from my understanding, maybe sometimes fighting with fans about certain decisions or things or what have you. But again, this is a very short story here, but I think I wanted to bring it up because I just don't understand, and no one understands why this happened. So it's really just about speculating, right? Which is never helpful, but always fun. So again, there's a couple reasons why this could have happened, and I've already kind of talked about a few, but I'll kind of run through them all again. So it could be creative differences, but again, Disney is not afraid to make that clear that that's a reason why they're splitting up with someone. I mean, if you just look at Star Wars, right, infamously, the Han Solo film, infamously had Lord and Miller at the helm, and then they were abruptly directed halfway through production, most of the film had already been shot. So they're not afraid to make it clear when it's creative differences. So that seems unlikely. He did something immoral or unethical or illegal, right? Whether it be sexual harassment or something, comments have resurfaced or something. I don't know. But again, that also seems unlikely, but more likely, but unlikely because of what I said before, that you have this guy, the head of Marvel Studios TV, saying something halfway positive about this guy. So, again, if I were him, I wouldn't want to make a comment like that unless, I wouldn't want to make a comment like that if I know something bad is about to come out. Now, that being said, though, rereading this, maybe that comment was made before the firing. But the way I kind of read it in my research, it seemed like it was kind of part of that. So, I'm not sure. Maybe it was personality differences. Maybe he just ruffled the wrong feathers. Right, maybe, he said the wrong thing to the wrong person at Disney, and maybe it was a death by 1,000 cuts, and just eventually leadership was just we don't want to work with this guy anymore. But again, a week before this show is premiering, season 1 is about to come out. Season 2 is basically already written. He's already thinking about ideas for season number 3. So it's just very odd. The entire situation is just very strange. Okay. Let's move on to story number 3. Let me just grab a drink of water. I told you some of these stories were going to be shorter. Okay. So another kind of shorter story here, but again, no less interesting. So a report has come out. That makes it sound like scandalous. Or someone has released a report showing that streaming subscribers don't mind ads interspersing the content that they watch. So this report is published by Tubi, which is owned by Fox Corp, and Harris Poll. Obviously, Tubi has a vested interest in this because they are a free-to-stream, ad-based streaming service. Them kind of sponsoring this report is obviously in their best interest. The report surveyed about 2,500 adults who stream at least 1 hour per week. And here are some of the key findings. So about 56% of viewers stream between 1 to 3 hours in a sitting, with 40% binging for more than 3 hours. So it's a pretty, streaming has really become a key part of I don't know what you would call it, but just like that period when you come home from work and you're fried and you just want to relax, throw on streaming, right? It's become a lot more common. Obviously, I mean, I'm not the first person to say this. This isn't new. Subscribers, but another key finding here, subscribers prefer options in terms of their different streaming services, which I find surprising, actually. I would be of the mind that people would rather, they long for the days of Netflix where it was more or less everything you could ever want to watch is either on Netflix or Prime Video or maybe Hulu, right? But it seems here that people on average have about 4 to 5 different streaming services. but that, I guess that also makes sense with me. We have about that many. We technically have more, but I don't pay for them all. Some of them like our family or whatever. But I'm trying to think about it. We probably have at least 4 or 5, if not maybe 6 or 7. But I wish it was all in one place. But I guess that's just the reality of the situation. Subscribers spend more on streaming than gas. So they report spending about $120 a month on streaming versus $112 a month on gas. So just a little bit more expensive there. And also this stat here, which I find very interesting. 71% of Gen Z or millennials canceled streaming subscriptions, and they cited specifically price hikes. We talked about this last week. Netflix is most likely going to see another price hike this year. Again, as streaming services transition from a strategy based in subscriber growth and moving to one more based in profitability. And this is something I've been interested in because there is this kind of balance between, if you raise your prices, you're going to make more money per person, but you're going to have people drop off who just say, I don't want to pay for this anymore. We've been seeing the price hike seem to have worked a little bit. So what this tells me is that a lot of people were just like, screw it, I'm just going to bail. I don't want to pay this extra amount of money. But not enough people did that to hurt them. That ultimately they lost subscribers, but they're making more money in the month to month, right? So I find that very interesting. But then the big takeaway here, I think, is that the majority of subscribers are okay with ads, which feels really antithetical. If you consider, again, the origins of streaming, which had many kind of selling points, but one of them, I feel at least personally, was an ad-free experience, those early days of Netflix. But it seems like people are mostly okay with it if it lowers prices, right? If it, makes the experience more cost-effective for them, they don't mind sitting through a couple minutes of ads every 15 minutes or whatever it might be, right? This is contrasted by Prime Video, forcing an ad tier. So I have a whole video on this, which you go check out. But essentially, Prime Video, a lot of these services had their basic plan, and then they introduced a cheaper ad plan. What Prime Video did was basically everyone who was paying the cheapest amount, Prime just said to them, okay, you guys are going to have to watch ads now. And if you want an ad-free experience, you have to pay extra. But now a lawsuit has been brought because some people paid for like a year of Prime Video. So essentially they're saying that they paid for a product they're no longer getting, right? So that's like ideally not how you do it, but people are interested in the idea of like, okay, I'm normally paying $10 a month for Netflix. Oh, but there's a $7, and I'm making all these numbers up, by the way. Oh, but there's a $7 monthly plan, but I have to watch ads. Oh, I'll do that. That I don't mind that. If I save $3 a month, that's $48 a year, right? Again, not only people okay with ads, but specifically 62%, so about 2/3, preferred free ad-supported streaming. Things like Tubi or Freevee, or not quite in the same conversation, but something like YouTube. And not YouTube TV, but just YouTube. Like something like a video like this, where essentially it's free, but you're paying with your eyeballs. You're paying because YouTube then sells your attention to someone to sell ads, right? Also, we have another interesting note here that younger audiences are increasingly watching live sports programming via streaming as opposed to cable. So again, that's more opportunities for ads. And people are already used to seeing ads, as opposed to you're trying to get people who have been used to ad-free streaming for years, trying to get them comfortable with ads. Sports streaming is going to be so much easier to get people to watch it even with ads because they're used to it, right? It's been a mostly cable experience with ads. So why is the ad-supporting streaming model important, right? Like I said before, companies are a lot more concerned now with actual profitability as opposed to just like subscriber growth at whatever cost. Another thing though is that this is a growing audience, right, as compared to the shrinking cable audience. So there are more and more people every day to potentially be seeing these ads, and that's good for business. And then not only that, the ads, because it's able to, these apps are able to look at your data, for better or for worse, look at your data, figure out kind of based off your viewing, preferences, what kind of person you are, what things you might be interested in. So the ads can be way more targeted, right? As opposed to cable, it really is they're just going to show it to everybody and hope it kind of, inspire someone to look into that product, right? This can be way more targeted, which is a lot more bang for your buck if you're someone who wants to advertise something on Tubi, right? And I've talked a lot on this weekly show. I feel like I talk about it every week, but the development of what streaming is going to become in the next even just couple of years is going to be a really interesting story to kind of track, right? And it's it could be possible that this ads are way more commonplace in streaming. And I kind of see that obviously there could be variations of this, but I could see a future where essentially there are 3 basic tiers. You can use this for free, this service for free, but you have to watch ads. There could be then a paid version that still has ads, but less ads. So maybe if you have a commercial break every, 15 minutes, maybe it's every 30 minutes or every hour, right? Or whatever it is. And then a third most expensive tier could be you pay more, but you have an ad-free experience. So the people who, really don't want ads and have that extra, disposable income could then pay for it, right? That kind of feels like a healthy breakdown where, again, you're giving people the options. And I think that's what made people like streaming in the first place. Among all the selling the factors that made people want to use it is the fact you gave you options. In the original sense, it gave you options in terms of when you could watch. But now it could potentially, another option that streaming could give consumers is like, what kind of experience do you want and what are you willing to pay for to have that experience? So again, I think this is interesting. Again, nothing in this report is particularly revelatory, but I think just reinforces just general trends that are going to continue to develop. Okay, let's go to story number 4. Let me just grab a drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. Elon Musk looking very doing an interesting face there in this photo. Elon Musk has canceled the partnership that he was going to have, or maybe not he specifically, but X, formerly known as Twitter. He's going to cancel this partnership with Don Lemon and the Don Lemon Show. It was set to debut today, and the news came out of this cancellation basically less than 24 hours after Don Lemon revealed the first guest on the show would be Musk. So this original partnership dates back to January of this year. Lemon entered an agreement with Musk after Lemon left, or more accurately was ousted from CNN in April 2023 for like a host of reasons, just kind of just saying, I wouldn't even say politically incorrect, but just kind of things maybe you shouldn't say. The key one was talking about, I think it was Nikki Haley, talking about like, well, she's not in her prime and she's like not that old, and people found it kind of sexist and the way we kind of write off women over 40, right? It kind of, people felt it kind of spoke to a misogyny that a lot of gay men have and all this. So it kind of it was kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, on top of the fact that the new CEO of CNN, didn't really get along with Lemon. Lemon much preferred the previous CEO, who I think was Jeff Zucker, right? So he was kicked off of CNN. So the idea in this partnership would be that Lemon's show would be hosted on X, right? Musk really wants, who knows if this was really the reason why he bought it or wanted to buy it, however long it's been now, like a year or a year and a half. Also was kicked off of his cable network, like on the same day, I think, as Don Lemon, which was a complete coincidence, but kind of weird. Carlson currently streams his show on X. And the CEO of X, Linda Yaccarino, has announced, has said explicitly the platform wants to shift to a, quote, video first kind of experience, right? So the idea would be that Lemon's show would stream on X first, right? I don't think it would have been exclusive, but it would have started on X and then gone elsewhere, right? And initially the partnership seemed to be going well. Lemon initially praised Musk and X, saying X is, quote, the biggest space for free speech in the world, end quote. Well, free speech to say what? Usually horrible things or racial slurs or this, that, and the other. So why is this happening? So there was this interview. Like I said, Musk was, well, he is, because I think the Don Lemon Show has now premiered. So Musk was the first guest on the very first episode. And Lemon interviews Musk, and they cover a variety of topics. They cover lawsuits against Musk. They cover legal actions that Musk has initiated. They talk about his drug use. They talked about how to moderate hate speech. And, Lemon notes Musk's own, troubles in his anti-Semitic comments that he's made. And Musk seemed kind of, argumentative and kind of dismissing like this the premise of the question, and it seemed to not be a very affectionate interview experience. So which then leads to cancellation, right? So it was reportedly canceled merely hours after the interview took place. And according to the New York Times, salespeople at X were blindsided because they had been tracking the sales of ads for the show, like literally when the cancellation was announced. This was very out of left field. X in their official statement said that Lemon's show, quote, is welcome to publish its content on X without censorship, as we believe in providing a platform to creators. A platform for creators to scale their work and connect with new communities. However, like any enterprise, we reserve the right to make decisions about our business partnerships, and after careful consideration, X decided not to enter in a commercial partnership with the show, end quote. And, of course, that's like the very PR corporate version. So, of course, Elon Musk has to follow up. Basically saying, quote, his approach was basically just CNN, but on social media, which doesn't work, as evidenced by the fact that CNN is dying. And instead of it being the real Don Lemon, it was really just Jeff Zucker talking through Don. So it lacked authenticity. All this said, Lemon/Zucker are of course welcome to build their viewership on this platform along with everyone else, end quote. Yeah. So why don't we just keep going? So the fallout, Lemon is obviously unhappy. Again, like, they had kind of had this kind of agreement supposedly, and now Lemon feels like he's now being cheated out of that. And we have a quote here from Lemon saying, quote, there were no restrictions on the interview that he willingly agreed to, and my questions were respectful and wide-ranging, covering everything from SpaceX to the presidential election, end quote. And then he said further, you canceled my contract after our interview. I don't think you believe in free speech, end quote. So he's basically calling Elon Musk a hypocrite, which a lot of people have said in general, where it's like, the reason why you wanted to buy Twitter, was because, it felt like, for you, Twitter was the public square. It was a bastion of free speech, and all of these liberal woke people were constricting free speech, which I think is a mischaracterization of the whole thing. But, Lemon's basically accusing him of hypocrisy, where it's like, you say all this stuff about free speech, but then you don't like when people criticize you. And then furthermore, he's like, look, you could have said there were no-go zones. You could have let me, we agreed that nothing was off the table, essentially. And so you seem now concerned or angry that I talked about certain things. So it's like, what the hell is wrong, right? And Lemon may sue, right? So supposedly, he might sue for damages in the 7-figure range, which is a lot. But Axios confirms that there was no formal contract, which you should have done with Elon Musk. You should have known better, Don Lemon, to get a formal written signed contract with this guy. Because ultimately, the point of the story here is Musk is volatile, right? He is an impulsive person. He makes decisions on a whim. The fact he even owns Twitter was more or less an impulsive decision, which he then tried to back out of. And the courts were like, no, you can't back out of it. You have to follow through now. And again, he's trying to make these partnerships to make X, a quote unquote video first platform. How is he going to make strategic partnership? Like, no one wanted to touch this thing anyway. But now you're like, even people who are maybe okay, like, okay, Musk is, has some issues, but maybe it could be good for our show or our business or whatever might have you. But then you see this and you go, okay, I'm really would be concerned about entering into any kind of strategic partnership with Elon Musk and X. So I think I would say he's shooting himself in the foot, but at this point he shot himself in the foot so much there's no more foot. The foot has just been obliterated by him shooting himself in that foot. So, it's just sad to see what Twitter has become. But I'm sure we will all move on. Okay, let me move on to last story number 5. So, just a warning, we are going to be talking about, war and genocide, we're talking about the Holocaust and the war going on in the Middle East right now. So full disclosure, content warning here. I'm going to try not to be like super, triggering or talk about anything that should be super unsettling, but this is just the general situation. So there have been a lot of reactions following Jonathan Glazer's Oscar acceptance speech from about a week or so ago. And reactions is maybe the nicer word, but it's really more controversy. There's been a lot of controversy. So what's all this about? So Jonathan Glazer is a British filmmaker. He's also Jewish. And his film, The Zone of Interest, won Best International Feature Film at the Academy Awards last weekend. And the film, if you haven't seen it, it focuses on a Nazi, the commandant at Auschwitz, and his family. And like their house, this beautiful, it's like very beautiful house, and like this beautiful garden and yard, is right next to Auschwitz. Like the wall, there's the wall separating them from the concentration camp. And you never see the Holocaust happening, but you hear it, right? So the film also won Best Sound. Like you hear screams like in the distance or whatever, and the film is really intellectually compelling. It's this idea about how, I don't even want to say good people, but normal people, right? Normal people compartmentalize the evil that either they do or their society does. It's about the ways we compartmentalize that and try to ignore it, even though we all know what's going on over the wall, the proverbial wall, right? I found the film, like I said, intellectually compelling, but cinematically a little undercooked. Like it felt more like it could have been like a really great short film or like a 40 to 60 minute mini feature. But it kind of felt more like an idea and not quite a film or like a story, right? But people really liked it. It was nominated for Best Picture as well, but it did win this award for Best International Feature Film. So he goes up with two other people, two producers of the film, but he's the only one that speaks, and he wrote this speech in advance. And I'm going to read you the speech in full, which is not super long, but I think it's important to hear the full speech, so then we can actually then know what he's saying, talk about what people are saying about the speech, and then kind of figure it out from there. So he writes, quote, "Thank you so much. I'm going to read." And then he goes on. "Thank you to the Academy for this honor and to our partners A24, Film 4, Access, and Polish Film Institute. To the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum for their trust and guidance. To my producers, actors, collaborators. All our choices were made to reflect and confront us in the present. Not to say, look what they did then. Rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It shaped all of our past and present. Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation, which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all the victims of this dehumanization, how do we resist? Alexandra Bierstron Kolodziejek, I apologize. The girl who glows in the film, as she did in life, chose to. I dedicate this to her memory and her resistance. Thank you." End quote. So just a quick note, that person he mentions, there was a real life Polish resistance fighter to the Nazis who would sneak food to Auschwitz outside, like leave food in little hidden spots. And she's in the film, which I didn't know actually now until I started doing research for the story. And the way they do it is that it's during night, and they use basically like a thermal imaging, right? So it's like, she's like this really bright figure in the darkness. So I guess now understanding this, it was thematic, right? This idea that she's like this light. She's the only person doing the right thing in this whole movie, right? So that speech has garnered a lot of controversy, right? Has said, and people who disagree, shall we say, and that's putting it lightly. So in terms of the support, a lot of this can be reading quotes because I think it's really important to kind of hear the diversity of thought about this, and then kind of, as best I can, let you kind of decide for yourself kind of how you feel. So the supporters, we have people like Asif Kapadia, who directed the documentary film Amy about Amy Winehouse, saying, quote, "He used his power and position in the biggest global stage I don't know if the Oscars is the biggest global stage. But anyway, in the biggest global stage, to speak up for people with no power, no voice, or those too afraid to speak up in an industry which is very conservative and risk-averse and which has a long history of blacklisting people, which is true. He stood up and told the truth. This is what true artists do, end quote. We also have a quote here from Jesse Peretz, who's a director in the industry, saying, quote, I think this is a case where nuanced language is unfortunately a dangerous thing to try to employ because our intense emotions can make us want to bend the meaning behind words that make us uncomfortable so that it becomes easier to reject them, end quote. So yeah, Jesse's point kind of here is like that, you know, if you kind of make like this wishy-washy, like we want peace, like anyone could kind of then take that and kind of suit it to their own perspective. So Jesse seems to be in favor of kind of like being a lot more explicit on Jonathan Glazer's part. Stephanie Fox, who's the executive director of the leftist group Jewish Voice for Peace, said, quote, he wants to imply the lessons of the Holocaust to the horrors that, quote, confront us in the present. And while his detractors want nothing more than to avert and distract our attention from the Israeli government's genocide of Palestinians, Glazer speaks for the massive and growing number of Jews who honor our histories by joining our Palestinian siblings in the struggle for freedom and justice, end quote. So she's kind of touching on Glazer's point about, you know, the film is less about, oh, look what these people did, more like, you know, what can we learn? And kind of speaking broadly, I think this is a really interesting idea of the film, that the Nazis, full stop, are awful, and really are some of the most evil, one of the most evil groups to have ever existed in human history, right? Just in terms of, maybe there were worse people like 8,000 years ago, but just because they're awful, but they also had the access to the technology to, you know, genocide a whole group of people at a mammoth scale, right? But that being said, we like to use the Nazis as a convenient scapegoat for evil to make ourselves feel better. That it's very easy just to be like, well, we're not that bad, right? And forget this situation in Israel and Palestine. Just throughout history, you can find lots of examples of even in World War II, like we did some awful things, or maybe not awful, depending on your worldview, and like, well, they were maybe bad but necessary. But the refrain is always like, oh, well, at least we're not the Nazis. And I think they become a very easy scapegoat, as if morality is this binary good and evil, and not, there can be really bad things and slightly less bad, but still really bad things that people can do. We also have a quote here from Simone Zimmerman, founder of If Not Now, which is like a grassroots organization calling for a ceasefire in this conflict. She says, quote, to me, the most important line in the speech, and the one that nobody's having a meltdown about, is the idea that this film is meant to be a wake-up call to us in the present. Kind of like what I was just saying. The people who are in hysterics about the speech are the very same people who are aggressively invested in denying the atrocities that are currently being committed in Gaza by those who do, in fact, invoke a memory of the Holocaust to justify their crimes, end quote. So she's kind of touching on this idea that Israel kind of tries, according, from Simone's perspective, uses the totally real and awful just treatment that the Jewish people have had, not just in the Holocaust, but really for thousands and thousands of years, right? But then Israel as a state, as a nation state, as a military force, uses that as kind of like a moral shield to justify essentially anything that they want to do. Right. And then one last kind of bit of support here. We have a group called Breaking the Silence, which is a group of Israeli military veterans, which, if you don't know, military service in Israel is compulsory. Right. So I believe almost the entire population has been in the military. So this is, I think, pretty, important here that this is from like Israeli military veterans. These aren't like bleeding heart, people might say bleeding heart liberals in the West. These are people who are actually on the ground there, or were on the ground. Maybe they're not anymore. And this organization put out a statement saying, quote, Glazer took an unequivocal stance against the cynical utilization of Judaism and the Holocaust in the name of justifying the occupation. Like I was saying before, we refuse to accept the ease with which the blood and lives of civilians is used as justification for political ideologies or as a bargaining chip. Empathy is not a zero-sum game, end quote. At the very least, I agree a lot with that last statement, that we often, like, if you support this, then you don't support that. and a lot of times it might be that both should have your support, or rather none of them should have your support. Again, we were talking about the Cold War earlier with China. This look at the United States and the Soviet Union. You could say like, oh, well, if you don't like America, that must mean you love the Soviet Union. And it's like, no, the Soviet Union also had a bunch of human rights, violations and issues, right? The issue with the Soviet Union, in my opinion, wasn't the economic piece of it. It was like the repression and the atrocities part, not the economic part. So I think people think of things in a very binary, almost like in a sports mentality, and empathy. Like, I really like that quote. Empathy is not a zero-sum game. Okay, so what are the detractors saying? So, again, just as numerous, have been people who are not very happy with Glazer's speech. So we have the Anti-Defamation League CEO Jonathan Greenblatt saying, quote, "It's truly disheartening to see someone minimize the Holocaust literally as they're accepting an award for a film they made about the Holocaust. Glazer talks about understanding where dehumanization can lead, yet is blind to the fact that it's Hamas's dehumanization of Jews and Israelis that led to the current war. Let me be clear. Israel is not hijacking anyone's Jewishness. It's defending every Jew's right to exist," end quote. We also have a quote here from Michael Rappaport, who's an actor, saying, quote, "Glazer exploited the Holocaust, its victims, and survivors, while he refutes his Jewishness in front of the world," end quote. So this is actually a misunderstanding of what Glazer said, which is kind of Glazer's own fault. He should have worded this better. He says in his quote, let me see if I can pull it back up, that we stand here, where is it? We stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation. What he's saying is our Jewishness and our Holocaust, our Jewishness and the Holocaust are being hijacked. And he refutes that. But what it makes it sound like he's saying he's refuting his Jewishness. Which is not what he's saying, but that's very easily, like, I don't blame anyone for thinking that. Like, it kind of sounds like that. And then you have Ben Shapiro. I'm not going to say much about Ben Shapiro, but he says here, quote, "In Jonathan Glazer's zone of interest, you don't see one Jew. Those are the best Jews, according to Glazer. The faceless victim screaming in the distance. Ironically, he's the villain, picking up awards from the bodies of those anonymous dead Jews while ignoring the living ones getting slaughtered in the Gaza envelope by genocidal murderers," end quote. Variety notes that there are several Jewish characters in the film. They're not very prominent, to be fair, but it kind of makes it seem like Ben Shapiro hasn't watched the film. We also have a quote here from Laszlo Nemes, who's director of Son of Saul, which was a film that I think won Best International Feature a few years ago, also about the Holocaust, also about Auschwitz, saying, quote, "I like The Zone of Interest very much. I think it's an important movie. When you make a movie like this, there is a responsibility attached to it. Glazer has clearly failed to measure this responsibility, including vis-a-vis the destruction of the European Jews. And it was appalling that the elite of cinema was applauding for it," end quote. Was applauding him for it, end quote. So again, someone else who's made a similar kind of film, feeling that, Glazer is kind of doesn't understand, he made this film, but kind of misses the point, according to this director. And then we also have a quote from the Holocaust Survivors Foundation USA's 94-year-old president, David Schechter. He wrote in an open letter, quote, "I watched in anguish Sunday night when I heard you use the platform of the Oscar ceremony to equate Hamas's maniacal brutality against innocent Israelis with Israel's difficult but necessary self-defense in the face of Hamas's ongoing barbarity. Your comments were factually incorrect and morally indefensible. The occupation of which you speak has nothing to do with the Holocaust. You should be ashamed of yourself by using Auschwitz to criticize Israel. If the creation, existence, and survival of the state of Israel as a Jewish state equates to occupation in your mind, then you obviously learned nothing from your movie," end quote. So very strong feelings from on both sides. So what do his what did his collaborators think? I'm also looking in the comments. Vivian Metzger writes, "This is so silly. Did his PR team not review the questions beforehand?" Okay, so this is actually a great point, because I believe that what was I gonna say? I apologize. This was basically something that he kept under wraps with him and one of his producers. I forget his first name, but the last name Wilson. And Wilson had made similar comments in the past. I'm saying, quote, we should, in other events, not the Oscars, saying, quote, we should care about innocent people being killed in Gaza or Yemen in the same way we think about innocent people being killed in Mariupol or in Israel, end quote. So Wilson's kind of perspective here seems to be kind of, again, like this kind of like sports mentality of like, if you're like the George Bush, if you're not with us, then you're with the terrorists, right? And this idea, like, yeah, people were killed. People were killed on October 7th that should not have been. That was immoral. But that people are also being killed in Gaza that should not be getting killed, and that's immoral too. That to try to be like, but to affirm one should not disqualify you from affirming the other. That they are both those things can be true at the same time. That all of those deaths are awful and morally unjustifiable, right? But yeah, Wilson was reportedly in on this plan for him to make this speech. But then the other person with him was a producer, more of like a financier, Len Blavatnik. He was silent up there, So what's his background? So he's a Soviet-born billionaire, long ties to different Russian oligarchs. Has donated millions to Republican causes, and I believe Trump's like inauguration committee or whatever. He was involved with Weinstein brothers in Hollywood in terms of financing some of their films. He's reportedly a very close friend with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And a spokesperson for Blavatnik said, quote, Mr. Blavatnik is extremely proud of the zone of interest and the acclaim it has received. His long-standing support of Israel is unwavering, end quote. So it's very clear where he stands. Again, how much of that... I think a lot of the people that are detracting sincerely believe what they're saying. Blavatnik seems like a very cynical, geopolitical actor here. So I'm not sure how genuine that support is for Israel, frankly. But then you also have another person who wasn't up on stage, executive producer of the film, Danny Cohen, who said, quote, it's really important to recognize it's upset a lot of people, it being the speech. And a lot of people feel upset and angry about it. And I understand that anger, frankly, end quote. And he also continues on saying, quote, I just fundamentally disagree with Jonathan on this. The war and the continuation of the war is the responsibility of Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization which continues to hold and abuse the hostages, which doesn't use its tunnels to protect the innocent civilians of Gaza, but uses it to hide themselves and allow Palestinians to die. I think the war is tragic and awful, and the loss of civilian life is awful, but I blame Hamas for that, end quote. And this situation just highlights a growing divide in Hollywood over the Israel-Hamas war, right? Relatedly, and I think I talked about this last week in my video recapping the Oscars, which you should go check out. There were protests outside of the Academy Awards, and these protests actually caused like a slight delay, like the broadcast started like a few minutes late. And again, the speech in the moment was met with a mixed response. Some people stood up and clapped, other people crossed their arms and didn't say anything or didn't react at all. Many attendees wore like the Artists for Ceasefire pin. And even just going beyond the Oscars again, like there's been in these about, 5 or 6 months since October 7th, the industry has been divided about this, right? So you have examples of people like Melissa Barrera, who's a Mexican actress who was in the Scream franchise, and she was fired, from what I understand, over her pro-Palestinian remarks. You also have Hunter Schafer, the trans actress from Euphoria, who a lot of people like quite a bit. She was arrested at like a pro-Palestinian protest. So maybe I'll regret doing this, but I think it's only fair, that, I've given you a sense of what everyone, all these different people think about this. I think it's only fair and appropriate that I, where do I stand on this? And full disclosure, I am a white Catholic American, right? So what I think kind of doesn't matter as much, I think, or not that it doesn't matter, but, I don't pretend that I should be the preeminent voice here. Right. But kind of just my world philosophy, I consider myself, I guess, what I would call like a Catholic pacifist or a Catholic leftist. So in my kind of worldview, violence is almost never morally justifiable. But retaliation is not the same thing as self-defense. So, the October 7th attacks were awful. Innocent people died. Right. That does not then justify, okay, well, we're going to retaliate with 10 times the amount of force, to my mind, right? People have been comparing this to 9/11, like even calling it October 7th, like using like the date as the name, as if the war on terror was morally justifiable, or like was this like perfectly clean, pure, innocent geopolitical venture, right? So I feel like those comparisons just illustrate the moral, at best, moral ambiguity of this situation, right? And again, like I was saying about the Soviet Union, I'm no supporter of Hamas, right? Again, innocent deaths are always wrong. Frankly, even guilty deaths are always wrong, right? In my worldview, it's not our place to take life, right? But again, by saying that doesn't mean I support Israel, right? You know, there's been nearly a century of violence against the Palestinians, which again, they would argue is in retaliation for, you know, attacks done by them, by other Middle Eastern countries. But I think just no matter how you slice it, just what Israel has been doing in Gaza has just been awful. And it has been doing, because it's, you know, people have described this area, maybe it's Gaza or the West Bank, just being like this open air prison. They essentially control the flow of water, of supplies, of food, you know, and even if they are attacked in this morally reprehensible way, that does not then give you carte blanche to, okay, well, we got to do what we got to do, right? You know, these arguments of like, well, we're going to, you know, shoot these hospitals. Well, that's where Hamas is hiding. Well, if someone has a human shield, that's awful. That's morally unjustifiable. But that's not then, okay, I'm going to shoot the human shield now, right? Like, it's kind of like, shit, checkmate. Like, I got to figure out something else to do here. You know what I mean? Like, you don't just go like, well, the person I need to get, if I'm a police officer, or like, you know, I need to get, you know, someone has a gun and they're using a human shield to protect themselves. I'm not like, okay, I'm just going to shoot the human shield now. But, you know, I also have kind of just Zionism I find morally dubious. You know, it's historically, from my understanding, is a mainly white European project. And it seems like England and Europe was more than happy to give the Jews a home so they would leave Europe, right? And they wouldn't be a problem for them anymore. You know, and there is that historical displacement of the people who were living there. And then some people would make the argument, well, this is our ancestral home, you know, which is valid, you know, especially if it's important to you culturally or religiously, right? That makes sense. The question is, does Israel have a right to exist, right? Israel being the nation state, right? I think that the Jewish people have a right to be there, but do they need a Jewish ethno-state to protect themselves, right? The argument has been like, this is the only way that we can be safe after thousands years of persecution. Is this really the way to protect? If anything, it seems to me, if all the Jewish people are in this, you're all concentrated in one place. It makes you a much easier target. So I don't know. I find that kind of more, you know, intellectually questionable. I'm also just generally against the idea of strong states. You know, I find if you look at history, the root cause of much conflict throughout human history has been borders and what is in those borders and what's not in those borders, right? So, I mean, in general, I'm in favor of like a two-state solution here, but ideally we could exist in a hypothetical utopian future where there's like a world government where you would still have individual nations and you know, breakups within those, but like, you know, the way, you know, Rhode Island and Massachusetts aren't regularly going to war with one another in a similar way if we're all kind of part of this like larger federal, internationally federal government. You know, countries are less likely to kind of have those concerns because borders are more for administrative and political purposes, not so much, you know, that they become a little more meaningless, right? And I also feel that conservative forces in Israel, like Benjamin Netanyahu, seem to kind of prey on liberal Israelis and international, you know, people around the world who are Jewish, and their attachment to the idea of Israel to do things that those people otherwise wouldn't like or wouldn't be in agreement with, right? So you look at like the settlements, you know, that have basically are technically illegal, but the Israeli government just like kind of lets them happen. And then furthermore, in terms of like the United States and the American support of Israel, you know, anyone who says like, you know, a politician who says, oh, it's because of their right to, the U.S., their support of Israel is purely pragmatic, right? We do not give a shit about any country's right to exist unless they're friendly to us, right? Because what Israel accomplishes for the United States, it provides a Western-friendly presence in a mostly hostile region, right? So again, like I mentioned earlier, you know, Russia and China back Iran, and Iran backs Hamas and Hezbollah. So it's less about the actual facts about Israel and Palestine. It's really more about like what is going to be most geopolitically beneficial to us in our kind of soft Cold War with China or even in ascendant Russia, right? In any event, I think all of this to say that I think Glazer's comments force us to reckon with what's going on, which seems to be the point of the film. The point is for us to be courageous enough to look over the wall, to see what we are doing or what is being done in our name. And at least for Glazer, he feels like his Jewishness is being used to justify something that he is not in agreement with, right? So however you side, I think this speech has been a net positive because it's forced us all to think about a situation, the situation beyond your initial assumptions and your presumptions and maybe your initial conclusions. Doesn't mean you're going to change your mind, but it forces us all to kind of think a little bit more deeply about all of this. So, I think it's just awful what's going on, no matter how you slice it. I think there's just really awful things happening. I'm not trying to both sides it, but it's just a really awful situation. And hopefully, I pray that, things start to improve in the near future. Okay, that was a little bit heavier. So let's kind of start wrapping up the show. So looking ahead to next week, or this upcoming week, films being released. The major release here is going to be the new Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I don't think these newer films have done particularly well financially, and they certainly haven't done very well critically. Nevertheless, this is projected to bring in about 31 to 43 million at the box office this upcoming weekend. I'm not sure if I'm going to go see it. If it's no good, I probably won't. I just don't have enough time in my life to go see bad movies. So that'll be interesting to see if it's able to knock off Kung Fu Panda. Okay. And I also want to give a shout out to, this is the segment where I talk about the best film I watched this week. This could be something I've seen a million times, something that I've never seen, something that came out yesterday, something that came out 100 years ago, whatever it might be. And the best thing I watched, I didn't watch a lot this week, but the best thing I watched this week was Coco, the Pixar film. I don't think it's great, but it's nearly great. It's a really, really fun film. I love kind of the, like the texture and the detail of like the Mexican culture. My fiance is Mexican, so, I have a little bit more of attachment to that now, having met her and known her. And I just love that end. Like, that's one of the most like cathartic endings in movie history. Not to spoil it, but you can see the picture here. And it's actually true to science that, they've done studies with like people with Alzheimer's that when they play the music from their youth, like they not only know all the details about the song, but it kind of like awakens something in their brains. So like other things have nothing to do with the song, they now remember. So they might have no idea who you are, and then they'll play this song from the youth, and they'll be like, "Oh, Jerry, it's you, Jerry. Oh yeah, remember I used to love this song." Like it kind of wakes something up in them. So that wakes up in a way and is able to actually like communicate is really touching and really powerful. Okay, so that's basically the end of the show. Just want to give a few plugs. I have a sister YouTube channel called Peter Squared, where I, look at topics related to film and media entertainment in a bit more detail, a more written video essay format. The current video I have up is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where I take a look at the Disney film Frozen and look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, featuring these two cartoon versions of my younger and older self. You can find the link in the description below. Also want to give a shout out to the podcast I do with my fiance I mentioned before, Viviana, a podcast called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where each week we pick, this is the show where we pick a film franchise and go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Currently, we are doing the Batman franchise. We just released our episode on Joker, which is obviously a big one, so highly recommend you go check that out. You can find the link in the description. It's also on YouTube. And then finally, Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It is started off as, and still is, a Substack newsletter where I review new releases in theaters in a more written review format. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, my most recent review is about Dune Part 2. Would be a super huge help if you could go check it out. Again, the link in the description. You can also find it at cinemanqso.substack.com. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe. If you could like this, that'd be really great. We're trying to grow the audience, trying to do all the YouTube SEO algorithmic tricks. So please, if you have not liked this video, leave a comment if you have any comments going forward. And please do not forget to subscribe. It was super great to do this episode. A lot of stuff to get through this week. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Peace out.